Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Janet Tran, and I serve as the director for the Center for Civics, Education, and Opportunity here at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Institute, or what we'd like to call the CCEO. We work at the nexus of civics and education policy, proud to answer President Reagan's call for an informed patriotism to ensure that a prosperous future exists for America. And we face the challenges to America and her institutions through supporting an educated citizenry and utilizing a multifaceted approach. Our center looks to create this collective impact on American society through partnerships that help support these three levers of change. And together, the CCO will look at these levers to better prepare America to answer the challenges of the 22nd century and, quote, renew the American spirit and sense of purpose. So I'm so proud to continue the Reagan Institute's State of Civics series, showcasing where this wonderful work is happening. The original civic mission of our schools has long been sidelined and actually is in danger of being further sidelined in a time where we think it is actually most imperative. So at the Reagan Institute, we believe that the greatest innovation, it occurs at the state level. And our State of Civics series will highlight the work of the states and explore exemplary civic learning, where it's happening, through the voices of our state chiefs, through the voices of national teachers of great renown, through other leaders of the field, and of course, through the voices of our young people, our students, the very purpose of what our education is for. So these programs will give a general overview of what's happening around the country, and we zero in on a case study of the highlighted state. And today, and then look on the horizon as well. But before we narrow down on the great state of Utah, I'd love to give some highlights and progress and excitement that's occurring at the national level. So first and foremost, really excited to talk about a project in March of 2022, led by PACE, Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, who released its Civic Language Perception Project, based on a survey of 5,000 Americans, 18 plus, in November of 2021. And among the questions asked was whether or not participants had taken a civics course. And there are so many rich findings in this report, but one significant finding is that civics courses correlated with more positive response to pro-democracy terms, including a 25% increase in support for civility, something that I think we all know we need, a 13% increase in support for democracy itself. So we know that if you've completed a civics course, you identify with all these positive terms and hopefully will ensure a better functioning democracy. Another national update is that our Civics Now Coalition published a 50-state civics policy scan in February. And this scan is extremely comprehensive, but it covers high school requirements, middle school requirements, assessments, and service learning requirements for all 50 states. For today's purposes, Utah does have a one semester requirement in high school and requires some form of civic instruction in the middle schools. And, like 32 other states, Utah graduates also need to be able to answer 70% of the US naturalization test correctly to earn their diploma. And as far as the service learning, we're hopeful that some of the innovation and legislation passed recently will bolster Utah above there as well. On the federal front, there's been a lot of movement for the bipartisan and bicameral Civic Secures Democracy Act, and it remains very much alive in our 117th Congress. So that represents about a $1 billion annual investment in K-12 civic education over 5 years, with the bulk of the funding, over 60%, really allocated to the states and to local education agencies. Finally, this year, measures exist to create what is called experiential civic learning pilot programs. Civics isn't just reading, it's doing as well. And state commissions have passed in both Georgia and Utah, respectively. So these bills are amongst the 230 that have been carried over from 2021 or were introduced this year that impact civic education. And we're really excited that Utah is included here on these nonpartisan recommendations. So for those of you joining us today, you can see why we are so excited to feature Utah as an exemplary state for civic learning and education. And with that, I am thrilled that joining us virtually is State Leader, Utah State Superintendent, Sydnee Dickson. Welcome, Dr. Dickson.
Thank you. So nice to be with you. And thank you for highlighting the work in Utah.
Our absolute pleasure. Next, we are joined by Mr. William Shields, a model exemplar for social studies education at West Jordan Middle School.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and the opportunity to also share about the amazing, awesome things that Superintendent Dickson and Dhati are going to be adding onto this as well.
Yes, what a great support group that Dhati has. I am really pleased to introduce our student representative, an exceptional senior at West High School, Dhati Oommen.
Thanks for the praise, but I'm really happy to be here.
We are very happy to have you here. And I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. And you represent a small fraction of the hundreds and thousands of people who are really creating this momentum in Utah that have sang your praises. So we're just really glad to be able to feature you and have you represent all the work that's been happening in your state. And I would love to begin with Superintendent Dickson. First, just thank you for being a longtime education champion. The role of a state superintendent is one of the most challenging, and certainly the context of the pandemic did not make it any easier. So our appreciation is endless. We want to understand how, amidst all of the competing needs and demands of our students and educators before and after the pandemic, how your state is working to ensure our students have opportunities to learn and to live civics in Utah schools. And what is it your office and you're doing to ensure that our students have the opportunities to be engaged and active citizens?
Well, again, thank you, Janet, so much for the opportunity. And thank you to Reagan Institute for hosting these state spotlights. You're going to hear from boots on the ground from a student who's really experiencing what we're trying to promote, and from William, one of our fabulous teachers who creates a safe space in his classroom every day for civic engagement and for civics to take root. We've had a long history of attention to civic and character education, and these two are really intertwined in both legislative practices and practical application. And the definition of civic education, it really is very practical and at the same time aspirational in our state. And I'll just, if you don't mind, and indulge me so that
Please.
I can define the way that we view civic education. To us, it means the cultivation of informed, responsible participation in political life by competent citizens committed to the fundamental values and principles of representative democracy in Utah and the United States. Now, that's a mouthful, but notice all the action words, the active words of participation and commitment. This cultivation of informed, responsible participation finds application in our state standards. A lot of states have standards. We've had long-standing social studies standards, and civic engagement is a very specific stated goal of our K-12 standards. We have a capstone course, as you mentioned, in U.S. government and citizenship, designed fully to prepare students for civic life. And just as academic mastery is the starting point for our Utah Portrait of a Graduate, which I'll talk a little bit about later, there's this deep knowledge of constitutional processes and the rule of law. So of course we start there and then we expand on the academic work. We also have strong partnerships in civic education. And if I were to list them all, I know I'll miss somebody, but I just want to highlight a few. Isn't it a great problem to have to know that there are so many stakeholders in this work? For example, law-related education is a local nonprofit that coordinates We the People and Project Citizen, mock trials, and more. And then we have a strong Utah Boys State and Utah Girls State programs sponsored by the American Legion. Our institutions of higher education, like the Hinckley Institute of Politics at the University of Utah and the Constitutional Literacy Institute at Utah Valley University, are leading out in work that's K-16 and beyond. Our other organizations that are a little more national, like the Freedom Foundation at Valley Forge, they're committed to supporting our work, and efforts like Utah History Day. When you hear about that, you think, well, is that really civics focused? But it reinforces the sort of civic skills that we believe are necessary to participate fully in our republic. And this doesn't even begin to capture the kinds of things that William and Dhati will talk about, the efforts in the classroom at the school level, the great, richly designed curriculum, and then the events that they hold, like Constitutional Bowls and Utah History Day. So that's a snapshot, Janet, of some of the work that we promote and support at the state level. And I said Janet, I meant Tina. Sorry, I just was on a meeting with a Janet, so sorry about that, Tina.
I hope that we can all agree that informed and responsible participation is something we want for our young people. And I know that the Reagan Institute is on board here. So,
and Janet, I messed up your name again. It's so sorry.
It's all well.
Sorry, it's everybody online. This is Janet Tran. She's amazing.
Correct.
So ignore
Correct.
my Tina Janet mess up.
I want to say that a couple of things, 3 things stood out when you were speaking. One is the informed and responsible participation. I think there is absolutely nothing that is controversial about informed and responsible participation for our young people. And I think it's also important to say that it's explicit, right? It's explicitly listed in your standards. So there is not any concern for, our stakeholders that you mentioned who are, who are trying to do this work in the best way that's most responsible for young people learning. And then also, finally, just thank you for listing out some of your partners, because democracy it's not a solo sport. You can't do democracy alone. It's messy. It requires a ton of people. So thank you for listing out all those partners. I think it's a great segue into our next question, which is, if you would mind, William, as an outstanding history and social studies teacher, you definitely can't do it by yourself. You definitely need resources as a educator and leader. And I just want to give a shout out that in 2020, you coached your students to become We the People champions. And that's an impressive feat. As our friends at the Center for Civics Education, they run a pretty rigorous program, and many adults would actually struggle with this. So a couple of questions for you from an educator's perspective, if you wouldn't mind. One, how do you prepare students to become active citizens? And what were some entry points that got them engaged or interested? Not to give away any of your secrets, but democracy is sharing. And can you maybe share more about the program for those who might not be familiar?
Absolutely. And again, thank you for this opportunity. And again, another shout out for law-related education. That's who we work through a lot with the We the People program. The We the People program is, as mentioned, a very rigorous and in-depth program that was first established, I believe, in 1987 by the Center for Civic Education, where there is a deep dive and learning about our founding documents and other things pertaining to our democratic republic. It's split into 6 different units, and without taking a lot of time to talk about them, the general framework follows. The first unit talks about the philosophical and historical foundations of our American political system. There's another one about the framers and the creation of the Constitution, one that is about how the US Constitution has changed or evolved to further meet the ideals contained within the Declaration of Independence. There's also one that talks about the values and principles embodied within the Constitution related to American institutions, another unit about the Bill of Rights. And finally, the last unit kind of covers the topics that the United States might face as a constitutional democracy in the 21st century. And to kind of sum up the program, students work both independently and collaboratively to construct a response in a mock congressional hearing. So we actually have volunteer stakeholders come into our schools and judge our students in a 4-minute speech and a 6-minute question and answer response, where they get to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding about the Constitution and its principles. The really amazing thing is that this program is offered on elementary, middle, and high school levels. There's a little bit of a difference in like the depth, and they make it both age and developmentally appropriate for the different age levels. I'm very lucky to teach at a school where we've been actually implementing this awesome program for more than 20 years now, with the awesome support of our school administration and our district. And kind of answering the question that you asked about how do I prepare students to become civically engaged. The number one priority that I as a teacher must do is to show the full breadth and understanding of the past. My course, I teach US History 1, and my course extends from the pre-Columbian societies and diversity all the way through the Civil War Reconstruction. But I think like one of the very first things that can happen is even before they enter my classroom, little but very powerful practices is welcoming students at the door, helping them learn about that I am invested in their individual learning, but also as them as a member of our community. This practice of communication and collaboration is basic and fundamental to civility and active civic engagement. Just kind of to like model the caring and about the well-being of others. One of the greatest compliments I have ever received was when an 8th grader said, you know, Mr. Shields, something that I learned throughout your class was I learned how to respectfully disagree with other people's perspectives. And which was such like a powerful, it brought me to tears, but it also made me so hopeful for our future. Each of my classes are filled with wonderful and diverse learners. And I frequently mention within my lessons that one of the most important practices in this class, but also within our community and society, is about the importance of analyzing the impact on all perspectives. I tie the events and the content that is specified within our core curriculum to United States situations, current Supreme Court cases, and even like trying to tie the past to the present. You know, an example of this, something that happens every year is to, for instance, just to take the freedom of religion, to connect that from, you know, the establishment of Plymouth to the inclusion of the establishment and free exercise clauses of the Constitution. And then to build upon that knowledge to connect to the more modern Supreme Court cases about this with like Engel versus Whitehouse and Van Orden v. Perry and Lemon v. Kurtzman. I mean, I was even driving home yesterday and listened on NPR because there's a case heard by the Supreme Court yesterday about the Establishment Clause. And I know for a fact that my students could have easily walked in there as experts to talk about the cases and the impact of those.
Well, we know from Annenberg surveys that many Americans can't list the 3 branches of government, and yet your students here actually understand the inner workings of congressional hearing and know, you know, what is actually discussed and precedences that are discussed and argued and constructed at the Supreme Court. So that's just incredibly important. I do love your emphasis on connection. We know that a connection to subject matter or an educator is extremely informative to a student's life. And of course, just really enjoy the concept of respectful dissent. You know, I really want Dhati. I know that there's a lot of concern in your generation about how do we do democracy in action and be respectful in our dissent, as oftentimes your adults have not behaved in the best manner. And I do want to point out that you're recommended to us as an outstanding student leader, both inside and outside the classroom. So I would love for people to understand a little bit more about your leadership journey from your point of view, a little bit about the community you come from, and you know what you've worked on in the past, and where you feel you are in your educational journey right now, and maybe what made you interested in being more engaged.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with where I am in my educational journey. I think I'm suffering from a serious case of senioritis, but I am really happy to be able to graduate from this incredible
There's
education
recovery, I hear.
system.
That's the good news.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready for that, but I'm sure I will be in the fall. But I am so thrilled and privileged to be able to have graduated from West High School. I will be graduating in June, and to be part of the incredible education system in the state of Utah. And beyond that, I will figure out what I'm going to do in college. And I am very certain that civics education is something that I'm going to continue to pursue throughout my lifetime, and hopefully be able to affect change with those around me and have them affect change on me as well. So I serve as a student board member for the Salt Lake City Board of Education. I do a lot of work with youth empowerment and bringing young voices to the table. A lot of the work that I do is kind of looking at tables where there aren't enough seats and dragging up a chair, not only for myself, but for every student across our state, because every single student deserves to have their voices heard. And whether that's through respectful dissent or respectful agreement with elected officials and leaders, Every student truly deserves to have their words be heard by somebody who's listening to them. And beyond that, one of the ways that I was very interested in kind of bringing civics education, specifically with young people, to a statewide light was through legislation. I ran two bills. The first one was House Bill 338 and House Bill 422 this year. The bills were a 5-year pilot program, opt-in piece of legislation to allow local school boards to make the choice on whether or not they would like to allow juniors and seniors to vote for their school board members. And while that does, I think, initially cause some pause for people when they hear about granting students kind of a larger arena in which they can express their voices. And I would arguably say there's no more respectful way to express dissent or to express your opinion than voting. Really, truly, that is built, ingrained within our society, the ability to vote and the right to do so as being able to exercise your civic voice. And I hope that the state of Utah and the students within us will view that as a civic duty and a responsibility. So I first got started on kind of being involved with civics, not with legislation, because that is a very steep hill to climb, but rather the
Continues
beginning.
to be.
Yeah, it does. The beginning of my freshman or sophomore year, I can't quite recall, but there was a teacher walkout. We had a half day because teachers were heading up to the Capitol to advocate for a per pupil funding increase for students in order to be able to have the materials we needed to learn and to continue to progress. And that was actually a bill in the legislature. So I think it was a Friday, and we had the half day, and I was heading out. Half my friends were going to the mall, and I was like, no, you can't go. Like, either go home or go do something else. And so I actually ended up following my teachers up the hill from West High School all the way up to the Capitol. And I found myself in the rotunda and then climbed up the 4 flights of stairs to the top of the Capitol. And I'm looking down at these thousands of teachers just on the rotunda, coming one after another, speaking successively, just really advocating for students on why we needed this funding increase. And I really was just watching up there and looking at all these incredible teachers advocating not on behalf of themselves, but on behalf of the people that they were educating. And I really thought, the one voice that's missing from this are the benefactors, which are students. And so I kind of like crawled my way down from the 4th floor. There were so many people, stood behind the podium and said, "Can I speak?" And the woman at the podium was like, "Sure you can, but no funny business." And I promised her that I wouldn't manipulate the use of the podium. And so I go up there and, I'm speaking about why education is so important. And I can say it again and I'll say it again, but I really, truly would not be here today without my teachers, without the education that Utah has provided me, without the leadership of teachers like William Shields and Superintendent Sydnee Dickson. I really would not be here today having the honor to speak to an audience about how to involve youth in civic education. And so I actually ended up crying on the podium, I think partially because of nervousness, because there were so many people. And I just cried and then rushed off the podium, and I was kind of stopped by reporters, and I was like, "Nope, I'm going home." And
no funny business here.
No funny business. I ran down the hill. My dad picked me up and I went back home. And then the next day I was kind of mortified and woke up to these articles titled "Crying Student Implores Legislature to Pass Funding Bill." And it is not because I spoke there. It is really truly because of the teachers who put in such an immense amount of effort doing that. But that was really my first taste of civics education.
What you're describing, it sounds like a laboratory for democracy. And so often we expect a light to turn on right when a student becomes 18 plus. And, there has to be the practice of democracy. And you're describing an experience where, perhaps there is the ability for students to participate in not just the decision making, but even the electoral process, in terms of at least local elections. So it's really interesting that you and your peers are taking the lead, and very much hope that others in Utah and outside will get that opportunity to practice in a democracy lab. Thank you so much for sharing. Well, Superintendent Dickson, I saw you smiling when she was describing some of these notions, and I'd love for you to take a chance to share more now that you've heard from both your teacher and student extraordinaires. What other civic education programs exist for your students, your teachers in Utah, and how can we ensure that all students in your state have access to learning opportunities?
Thank you, Janet. Great question. And I've known Dhati for a couple of years now. She served on our student advisory council to our board. I don't think I've ever heard that story before, Dhati. So thank you for sharing that. It just speaks volumes to how when students pay attention and lean in. And I so loved what you said about dragging a seat to the table so that you expand the voices at the table. That was pretty profound. I listed all of those opportunities for students, but I think it's our teachers like William who really provide opportunities in the classroom. And we're trying to scale up those best practices. We know they're out there. And I think we have a lot of our teachers we kind of teach by Pinterest nowadays. There are a lot of ideas out there, but how do you cultivate and scale up those that are really evidence-based and can result in opportunities for students who may not have the fortitude that Dhati has to just lean in and make something happen, but it can spark something. So we've had a pilot established by the legislature, and this year was funded. We had it funded a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, and then a lot of the funding disappeared. But this innovation pilot really will allow teachers like William to say, hey, I've been engaging in this and it's working, and I would like some time with other teachers. I would like some funding, and to be able to scale up and promote those practices. And I think that's something that we're really excited about. Our Utah Portrait of a Graduate has 13 characteristics. It's really a roadmap. And of course, we need another acronym in education, but MAP stands for Mastery, Autonomy, and Purpose. And so definitely we want our students to master our social studies standards that include civic education. We want them to become independent learners so that they obtain a lifelong aptitude for learning. And as Dhati mentioned, something that they carry on, not just because they took a course, but they become civically engaged and civic minded, and they're willing to have discourse with those who might disagree with them without being disagreeable. Those are lifelong skills that we're looking for. And then we want students to find purpose in school, and that includes service and civic engagement. We want them to be civic literate, but we also want them to engage in ways that give back to their community and really become part of the democracy and appreciating the republic of which they belong. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to really zero in on and scale up those best practices by providing time and space and funding for teachers to be together and share what they know.
I'll definitely come back and ask more about this local innovations civics education pilot program. I think we're all pretty excited across the country about what your aspirations are. But I'm going to jump to William first, if you wouldn't mind. You heard about a variety of programs, and you've obviously shared a bit about We the People, but are there any others you'd like to mention? And of the same sort of question, how do we ensure that all students have access to these opportunities, including our most vulnerable students?
That's a fantastic question, and I'm going to be echoing some of the programs that Superintendent Dickson has already previously mentioned. We have amazing outreach for our Utah educators. Everything from the University of Utah Huntsman Seminar to, as mentioned, the Utah Valley University Constitutional Literacy Institute. I had the wonderful opportunity to be a part of that this last year and connect with Oxford professors and experts from around the nation and the world. And it was just such a valuable experience. One thing that has been building and is an amazing unifier and kind of support for a lot of social studies teachers is the Utah Civics Learning Collaborative. And that is where the teachers and the lawmakers, and we have state school board members, all of the stakeholder groups kind of come together to communicate about increased civic education learning and even into like media literacy and digital literacy and academic service learning. There's amazing supports for summer training and enrichment as well, as mentioned with the Freedoms Foundation and what is known as Driven to Teach. the second question that you happen to mention about like making sure that all students have access is something that I want to give a really good spotlight on, is that we have a lot of very good positive progress. About 8 years ago, only 4 or 5 schools, middle schools in Utah participated in what I mentioned, the We the People competition. This previous year, which we won again, so I'm going to brag, our school won both in 2020 and this year in the southern region. We had 12, and in so much that they had to divide the state competition into northern Utah and southern Utah. It is amazing to see the growth, to make sure to unite both the urban and rural schools in Utah, to communicate between all of the different districts and offer the training and support opportunities. My school that I teach at has a Title I school demographic. Students speak many different languages, and we're all at different learning, and they are at different learning levels. We are, according to the director of Center for Civic Education, we are the only school in the country, as of 2 years ago, that are asking every single 8th grader to participate in We the People and not reserve it for just elective or honors classes. And so this is something that we're very proud about having these opportunities for all students, where every student, regardless of whether it's an English language learner, a general education, special education, or any other criteria, they can participate in this amazing experiential program. It does require a lot of planning, conversations, modification, and adaptation, but that is my job. My job is to make sure that every student is supported in this amazing program and through the other programs as previously mentioned, such as Boys State, Girls State, mock trials, Model UN, all of these amazing opportunities that we have providing for students. But it's also essential for us to communicate through things like the Utah Civics Learning Collaborative to make sure that our classrooms are equitable and meets the needs of every student's, individual student's needs. And so this is a great honor for us to kind of expand this and to continue this conversation between schools and with all of the stakeholder groups about making every program accessible for every student.
That's so critical. And, I've just heard it mentioned a few times now, and I think other states can really learn, and I'm sure there's hard-fought lessons learned, how, following up just a little bit, how are you involved in this coalition? How does the coalition stay healthy and ensure that all of these really diverse stakeholders are along for the ride, so that at the end of the day, our mission of providing high-quality civic learning opportunities for all of our students continues and stays top of mind?
And I apologize, I accidentally pulled my earbuds out at the very first, so I missed the first part of your question.
Just be interested to share from your teacher's perspective, how do you keep this coalition thriving, or how does the coalition keep you thriving, vice versa? I think so many states can serve to learn and understand how to engage their educators in a better fashion, and their parents and other stakeholders like their students.
It has been through an amazing networking and communication system set up on many different fronts, where we have an amazing State Office of Education director or directors that really help in the communication. We have Judy Hillman, who is the Utah Civics and Learning Collaborative director, and we have professors all the way down to elementary school students that come together. But one thing that is genius and really something that helps us gravitate together and facilitates conversation is we do look at the academic focus of it. We have media literacy focus of it. We have experiential learning, and we talk and we promote. And I'll tell you, I come out of those conversations so invigorated and excited to come and talk with my principal, vice principals, other teachers, and to kind of like really build that fire of civic education and helping communicate it with other educators through the state, and to just build up this amazing network that we've already had.
Well, President Reagan had a plaque on his desk that said it can be done. And, I think of the coalition, it really can be done. Dhati, you mentioned a lot of your friends went to the mall, but it was your mom who said none of that funny business now, right? I would love any additional thoughts you have to ensure that, students have the opportunities that you had, that, maybe students who are less privileged and fortunate, that these opportunities are available to all of your peers?
Yeah, sure. I think it's difficult for me to say because I have had those opportunities, but I think it does start with incredible educators. I think one thing that Utah does extremely well compared to other states is that we just have such a huge place to grow. Like there is no limit. Nobody is out there telling me that a 16-year-old can't write a bill. Just because it's never been done before, it doesn't mean that we can't do it. And I think that's something that a lot of students, I think, feel that there are these barriers because it hasn't been done before. And it's very difficult to kind of think of creating something when there hasn't been a pattern already established, rather by your parents or by other young people. But I truly have faith in students to be able to carve their own pathway because Utah gives us room to do that. Perhaps in another state, it would be extremely difficult to have a 16-year-old write a bill, advocate for a bill, lobby for it. But in a state like Utah, there's just no limit. I really think that there's so much space and breadth for students to be involved. And whether that's starting and attending their local school board meetings or doing things otherwise. One suggestion I do have to local school districts is to take the opportunity to have a student board member. That opportunity is available to every single public school district in the state of Utah. But as far as I know, only 2 school districts have taken advantage of that. And only 2 of them have a student board member position. I may be wrong in saying that, but I really do think that having a student on your board is so imperative and so important. Any way you cut it, students are the majority constituents of a school board. They are the majority benefactors of an education system, and education is a public investment. And so having a student on your board is of just crucial importance. And I know that there's school boards across the country that don't have a student board member on them, but I am really grateful to Salt Lake City School District to have the opportunity to put a student board member on their board and have us advocate for things and be able to be having disagreements at the table without being disagreeable. And that is just really, truly important. I urge school boards across the country to give space to students to have those disagreements, because I promise that your community will be more productive and better than it would be without our voices involved.
No, that's so many school mission statements say they prepare students for civic life, but you're right, they don't actually have students participate in a meaningful capacity in their decision making, and they don't even have representation through voice or advisory. In your opinion, I'll ask this theoretically, then I'll be a little more specific, but how do schools and other organizations prepare you to become a citizen in Utah and nationally? And maybe more specifically, how were you prepared to sit amongst school board members, people who were decision makers? What were some things you learned maybe in the classroom or in your participation in other areas of your civic life that prepared you to sit there with people like Superintendent Dickson and other school board members and decision makers?
I would say one is diversity of experience. So West High School is one of the most diverse schools in the whole state. I have the opportunity to interact with such a wide variety of students who come from all different backgrounds. And that really shows me that in the decision-making process, we have to account for decisions that are going to affect different communities in different ways. For example, when Salt Lake City School District went online during the COVID crisis, it was a split-second decision. We were just really, I don't think, ready for the actual ramifications behind that decision. So we were kind of, there were students who didn't have access to a computer, but school was online and things like that. And so being very mindful of the way that decisions affect communities differently. It is so easy to get trapped in your own bubble. And I say that as someone who is trapped in my own bubble. I think we all are at some times and at some points. But, having the discussions with my teachers in their classrooms, just like laying it all out, all the concerns, just realistically about what was going on in our community and things that we needed help with. I would stop by in the 5-minute breaks between my class periods and go to my government teacher and ask her for her advice on what was going on. I text my 5th grade teacher on upcoming decisions that the school board is having. And that is something that I find really effective, is seeking out different opinions before you create a decision. Or I don't have the ability to vote yes or no on anything that's on the agenda, but I do have the ability to change minds. And sometimes I would say for a student that is so much larger and so much more effective than actually being the single vote, because usually that's not a swing vote. But being able to do that is really important. And I think I view my position as a student board member as being one of leadership. And I have the incredible opportunity to be able to sit on the board with these board members advocating for students. But what that really means is that I am advocating for my peers, my community. And the way that I see that is really wanting to listen to their perspectives. I would put out quarterly surveys with like 15,000 responses, or like
That's a
1,500.
pretty strong sample size.
Yeah, those are statewide surveys, but local surveys, maybe it's like 200 or 300 students. During the COVID crisis, when we were online, I was asking students how they felt about transitioning to in-person school, how their families felt, what they were struggling with, whether that was economically or helping their parents try and figure out childcare and things like that. And I think what is most important as a leader is really seeking out the voices of your people. And I think something that really prepared me for that was the classroom, because teachers actively are seeking out the voices of their people, which are their students, and having those disagreements, those arguments, those are my favorite parts. And I really think that teachers truly adore those too, because that is really essentially leadership. And I have never seen a better way to teach young students how to be leaders and bring that throughout their lifetimes than I've seen it in the classroom.
Well, I don't think Mr. Shields shows up for the multiple choice testing, so you're probably right on the the discourse and disagreement. I love that you brought up the fact that you're reflective and that we all at some points go into our own bubbles and our own silos. And it's really challenging, especially during this time, to have the bandwidth for caring and the capacity to think about what everyone is experiencing. So it's just so important to bring forth that diversity of opinions and understanding and data, as well as we do this really critical work. So I want to move back, Superintendent Dickson. As I mentioned earlier, we're just really all excited about the potential of this state legislation created in Utah, this local innovation civics education pilot program. And we want, I'd love to understand from your vantage point. Sounds exciting, but what are your aspirations for the program? And how can we build on momentum at the state level and further expand access? What can we do with this?
That's a great question, Janet. William touched a little bit on it as well. But one of the things that came out of the Utah Civic Learning Collaborative, which really is this informal gathering of stakeholders that William addressed, and as part of the collaborative, members have been going out and conducting listening tours with our districts and charter schools across the state to hear from both teachers and administrators to try and encourage and reinforce civic education efforts. And in gathering that data, there are some really great ideas that have emerged in these listening sessions. And so we have some ideas out there that through this innovation pilot will enable us to scale up those ideas. At the same time, our educators have been really frank about the challenges that they're facing with civics education, especially in this climate that we've been talking about that is being perceived as highly politicized. And they know they need to provide students with those wonderful opportunities that both William and Dhati have talked about to engage them in really productive discussions on current issues, and to be able to walk away, as William's student did, to come back and say, the most important thing you taught me was how to disagree with people without being disagreeable. I didn't quote you well, William, but that's the essence of it. And so, how do we continue to provide our teachers with the skills and resources that they need so that they feel comfortable in having these discussions? And that's where transparency with parents and stakeholders comes into play.
So
public
critical.
education has to rely on the trust of the public, and parents and guardians of the communities really are strong partners in the education of our children. Parents are the first teacher and the primary teacher of the children, and therefore public schools exist in part to really support the family structure. So how do we communicate and create this culture of openness and civility? That's really key in developing the skills that Dhati is displaying, and to really have an informed citizenry. So these fundamental values and principles of representative democracy, including this willingness to engage with one another in civic dialogue, is key to all of this. You can scale up all these exciting practices, but if we don't have that foundation of trust among the stakeholders, then it's all for naught. And I can talk more later about some of the initiatives that we put forward. I love what Dhati said, again, about expanding the seats at the table. And this past year, a couple of bills were passed that the intention and the outcome will be to have more diverse voices at the table. An ethnic studies amendment and a concurrent resolution acknowledging and highlighting the history, culture, and contributions of the Native American peoples of Utah. Those are two initiatives that will get more voices and important voices at the table.
What I love so much about the State of Civic series is that, we highlight states and leaders who are doing great work. And every single leader I have had the privilege of speaking to, just like, we're not satisfied. We've gone far, but it's not far enough. So just that, in spite of success, you're not taking your foot off the gas. And that's really necessary, because democracy is a continuing, it's a verb. It is not a static thing. And I love that you talked about trust, because we are in a social contract with one another, and we want to understand that what our students are learning is going to prepare them to be engaged and conscientious citizens. And we want to make sure that that's exactly where we're headed and not in some other direction. So that transparency piece is critical to the equation in the coalition and then to the work. So thanks for sharing there. I want to follow up on the pilot program. And, we know, anyone who works in education, that assessment is just simply instrumental, critical tool to teaching and learning. And in order to ensure these most equitable access to these opportunities, we need to assess whether programs are working. We need to assess whether students are learning. So I'd be curious, and it's not, across as the scan, as the Civics Now scan shows, it's not assessed and evaluated in most states at this point in a thorough way. I'm curious in what ways Utah does measure civic learning through assessments and your evaluation systems, and what's up the pipeline, perhaps.
Well, as you mentioned, we do take the naturalization assessment as sort of an end of level for us, and we have very high passing rates. We've never felt like that was the robust and rich kind of assessment that we're interested in. And Utah is really moving into a competency-based space for our entire education system in all content areas. And teachers like William for many years have been showing those competencies through projects and orations and all sorts of very hands-on project and problem-based activities. And that's a really important way to show what you know. I think, I don't care what papers Dhati turned in, the fact that she knew how to navigate the system and learn how to work with legislators to sit down and craft legislation and be at the table and to really articulate her message around around having kids more involved by having the right to vote for their school board members. Like watching Dhati in action, that I would give you an A+, Dhati. I don't know what grade you got, but I'm just saying, watching you in action, you showed those competencies that you learned in the classroom and maybe out of school learning. Sometimes we don't value the opportunities that students have out of the brick and mortar or online school, and really engaging civically is broader than just in the classroom, but our teachers can give students, and our parents can give students, those fundamental values and pieces that they need to succeed. So we're really working in this space again of competencies. How do you show that you're civically literate, and what are some possible competencies that then can move you forward to really succeed and lead as you move to post-secondary? And so we're not looking for the perfect multiple choice, true false assessment. That's not the space we're really interested in. We're more interested in being able to show competencies.
I think that's a great place to switch over to William, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about what's happening in your classroom. How do you know when your students are ready for civic life? Obviously, not all of them go and write legislation before they're of voting age. So how do you know you're preparing your students, and what sort of assessments are utilized that you feel are real good indicators that we are meeting our school missions?
And to build upon how we already use that metric of the citizenship and naturalization test, the assessments that happen in mine and all of the classrooms are done in a variety of different ways, whether they be in a more summative or a more formative way. Many teachers, including myself, have included everything from, as mentioned, the multiple choice, learning some of the fundamental and foundational information, and expanding that to presentations, to collaborative activities, to authentic performance tasks, and even to service learning, where students bring their knowledge into the community and have those conversations at home. One of the best assessment methods that I provide is kind of facilitated and scaffolded through the year. Students are assessed in a variety of different ways on the importance of people, places, events, and ideas. And after they have, shown proficiency within these areas, then it moves on to those deeper levels of knowledge and application, to applying them, synthesizing, doing more in depth, talking about that with your families. And one thing I want to add upon, I know that this kind of ties to the previous question, but is to extend the learning in the classroom into the home, for teachers to encourage students to bring home the information from class, to talk with their family about what they're learning. Civics is a community learning opportunity. And one of the ways in which I also gauge whether students are kind of understanding the civics is by listening to the questions that they're asking. I conscientiously monitor throughout the entire school year what they're asking, kind of on what level are they asking, where it might start with early ones of, there's a term length, but it might add up to, Mr. Shields, would a representative actually respond to a letter if I wrote that to them? I've had students say, is it okay for students to sit in on school board meetings? And to start to bridge how they are an active part of the community. I've everything from city hall meetings. I've even had a student say, what if I sent the president a wedding announcement? Would they send me something back? And so the more and more that they see that they are an integral part of the interconnectedness of our society, a variety of metrics are used, and it definitely shows that their minds are making those connections between themselves, the government, society, and their communities.
Bringing it back to President Reagan's farewell address, he said that, we should be having those conversations about American history and America's place in the world at the dinner table. And if it's not happening, then it was the young people who are responsible for bringing it back. So I think we're on board with that praxis there. Dhati, I realized in my service as a school teacher many moons ago that when I gave tests or assessments, students always thought they were doing it for me. And assessments are actually for our students to understand if you're learning or improving. And I'd love to know what you think of sort of experiences or tools that you feel helped improve your leadership school skills. Maybe it's an assignment or an assessment where you're like, wow, that did make me better prepared to engage in my civic life. That's going to help me when I'm in college. That's going to help me in my career. So would love to understand how you reflect on sort of your assignments and assessments in school.
I do think, like Superintendent Dickson said, that so when I took the state civics assessment, I think I was 13 in 8th grade, because my school has middle school combined with our high school. So I was able to take it as an 8th grader. And, the test was, what are your Supreme Court justices? How many justices are there? And, things like that are more factual based. I don't think that was necessarily as effective. More, I think students viewed it as like kind of a tick box to be able to graduate, because you were more like reciting factual things. And I think that's usually the way that students view assessments as. I think the reason why a lot of times students perceive it as being for the teacher rather than for themselves is because they feel as though they're just regurgitating facts. But a lot of times those facts are important in order to be able to actually apply those facts to change. So for example, like navigating the legislative process is really, really difficult. So I did watch the YouTube video, What's in a Bill, which, while it gave me a good start, did not prepare me for the complexities of actually, getting a bill through the Rules Committee, trying to get it to clear committee, lobbying lawmakers, flipping votes, I having my bill being held off the agenda, trying to run out the clock on the legislative session, things like that.
That wasn't in the YouTube video. Sorry to say.
It wasn't in the YouTube video. It was very catchy, but it wasn't in the YouTube video. And I think that's a lot of the times why young people either feel apathetic or blindsided by the political process, is because when they do get involved, they feel as though they're hitting like this brick wall where they're not able to create change. And I know that, like, my bill failed twice. But what did not fail are the voices of the students who were behind the bill. There were about 100 students who came to the Capitol who were literally lobbying lawmakers. They were calling their interns, like asking to have meetings with them, trying to flip their votes, hassling them outside of the caucus rooms, and doing all these things. And I have never, ever been prouder of my community my whole life than seeing them at the Capitol, seeing these students who came in on the tracks from 4 hours away, who took the train for 4 hours to get to the Capitol building to go and lobby to lawmakers to do those things. And a lot of the times we talk about young people as, young people can't see themselves in the community. They can't see how they can affect change. But really, while I do think that that is super important, I encourage adults to see the ways that young people can affect change. I have been disrespected, stepped on. Students across the state have been, by lawmakers. I had one lawmaker tell me that immigrant children didn't know anything about politics. I had another one tell me that teenagers were just dumb. And he listed off a series of like 40 TikTok challenges. We choke on cinnamon, lick asphalt, do all these things. And, that kind of just insincerity and like the use of just so many biases and things against young people makes it very difficult for young people to be able to effectively create change, which I would say arguably is to the benefit of our whole community, to have voices involved, even though they may be differing, to be able to create policy and change. And in that way, I think being part of the education system, whether I really think the most valuable thing was the arguments that we had in class, and, even though like sometimes we would walk away and students would still be disagreeable, I really think that those arguments are what prepare people in the future to be able to create change, because change is not just a wave. A lot of times you have things fighting against it. And so being in a classroom, having those discussions, I think is the most important.
Janet, can I
please.
highlight one thing that Dhati said? I think this is where, in my position, I see the polarization in the community. Dhati said something really important. I would just capture it as a yes and. Yes, it's really important to know our forms of government, know the branches of government, know facts, know our history. All of those things are fundamental and critical. And putting those in play is the real active part of it. And I think that the polarization is we're creating social activism, or on the other hand, it's, kids should just know the facts. They're not civically literate if they're overdoing some of these activist things because they're not really understanding how government works. They can't engage with whatever political perspective their family comes from or they come from. They can't actively engage without knowing those fundamental elements. And I so appreciate that Dhati highlighted that. It's not an either or, it's a yes. And if you want to enact change, you really need to know the fundamental governmental aspects, the constitutional elements, the Bill of Rights, that, everything that we teach in school and have done forever, it's a yes and. So thank you, Dhati, for highlighting that.
I love that it's learning in practice, and it does sound like your interest in civics and American history, that's going to last a lifetime. You said something about failure, and failure is temporary. Failure is only failure if you stop and you say, I'm going to move on to do something else. And perhaps that's a reflection on the way in which we're forced to teach US history oftentimes, or history in general, that almost makes it sound like it's fait accompli. Oh, we passed the civil rights bills, and so that was settled, right? And the reality is nothing is settled. It's a continued, we move along on this arc together. So I think it's really important that we recognize the dissenters who didn't want to sign on to the Constitution, that people walked out of the Constitutional Convention, that it is not this monolithic group. So I think it's really interesting and intriguing that, I hope that your generation doesn't see things as, oh, I just do this one time and it'll go my way, or not, because it's a long arc, and it's a continued arc. So I think this is a great maybe to move to Superintendent Dickson, thinking about this content knowledge, which is so critical when we're teaching civics and American history, because our young people will be up against a lot of demeaning and challenging personalities if they don't show that they have proficiency. So I'm curious as to what promising pedagogical practices that you feel like you can promote from your vantage point for our teachers and our students to engage in high quality civic learning opportunities, not just the memorization of facts and figures.
Yeah, I so appreciate that question, Janet. For us, part of it is the skills, the knowledge and skills that students walk away with, not just the mastery of the facts, but things that we know show up in civic life and in the workplace and in family life. And that's problem solving and critical thinking, and an orientation to giving back to your community and to your family, that service orientation, and collaboration and communication, and all of those skills that some people call soft skills. I would call them essential skills. They really are essential to the fabric of our democracy. And then also that factual part of really appreciating the blessing and the gift that we have of belonging to a republic, and one that there are opportunities for all. And it's very hard to get excited, as Dhati mentioned, without really understanding those fundamentals. I personally would like people to understand, of all ages, to understand the local nature of government. I'm sure you wouldn't be amazed by the calls that come to our office or the governor's office of trying to solve a problem that really is at the local school level. So understanding how government works and how problems can truly get solved. And so that yes, going back to that yes, and creating opportunities and experiences for students in and out of the classroom, as well as really understanding the fundamentals. I often think of visiting the Constitutional Center in Philadelphia. I hope the students that live there and are able to visit feel as lucky as our kids when they get to come to the Capitol, because they have funding for Capitol field trips. But walking along those halls and thinking back to the creation of our country and where we are today, what lessons do we learn from those that created this great republic? And how do we carry those lessons forward to keep improving on our democracy? I think it's just so fundamental. And I appreciate the Reagan Institute and what you put forward to help make that happen. So thank you.
I just want to switch over right now and honor, we have a couple of questions come in from our audience here. And, I want to just summarize, because we've talked a bit about the coalition that's in place that we're so grateful for and we can't do without. But an audience member mentions that civic engagement is a family affair. And we've talked a little bit about parents and transparency, but this question is for anyone here. How do we better invite family to be part of the conversation, to be part of the education system? So that's one question. And another follow-up too, that is somewhat related, is how do we bring in civic initiatives to tie into having a healthy family life, have upward mobility, to be more than a great citizen, but to be successful in all facets of life? So I'll open up the floor to whoever would like to answer that question.
I might go first in the first question that you posed. I think that the communication and family engagement and that tie-in of transparency really begins um, on day one of the school year. The teacher can include links and access to the state core on their disclosures, active communication with the families, whether they be parents or guardians, about what is being taught, but also what is going to be taught. The encouragement within those emails, I know that I encourage my students, and I'll send an email home to the parents or guardians saying, I hope that there is a further discussion, because we were talking about, Hamilton versus Jefferson's view of, like the central versus the state government. But to really kind of to plant those seeds of conversation, so that not only are the students learning about the fundamental knowledge and skills, but then they get to go home and expand upon it, and then kind of like even at times role reverse and be the teacher at home to hear of their families' perspectives, and then that conversation continues the fluidity into the conversation back in the classroom, and what we start to see is more civic engagement. I wholeheartedly believe in communication with all stakeholder groups, connecting the family to the classroom, the student, to encouraging the student to bring their learning home to further that development in that knowledge base. And so in terms of transparency and family engagement, it really, I mean, granted, I'm a teacher, so I know that I'm going to be speaking from the teacher perspective, but it starts with the disclosure. It's that weekly communication about what are we teaching, what are we going to be teaching, also, how are we going to be teaching it? So if we are doing an experiential learning, if we're doing We the People or mock trials, or prepping students for consideration of boys or girls state, those should be things that we communicate with the home as an ongoing conversation, and not just one that is happening at the first or at the end of the year, or an occasional email.
Or when things might be a little dicey, right?
Exactly. And so, and what it does is it allows the parents or guardians to come in. I mean, I've had parent-teacher conferences where they'll sit down and be like, we've had many dinner conversations about your class, Mr. Shields. And while that has initially kind of causes you a little bit, I know that I would never include any type of bias. We include all perspectives when we're kind of teaching these things, and they go, it has been so awesome. The parents will continue by saying it's so awesome to see the students applying their knowledge and asking more about the parents and the family's perspectives of things. So in terms of connecting with the family, I see that one of the most valuable parts is for the teacher to communicate often, frequently, and also to encourage that conversation to continue outside of the brick and mortar of the school.
That's great. Dhati, do you have any thoughts about how we can better engage our families and our parents in the conversation?
I can address that in terms of voting. So I really think that one of the reasons why young people do feel kind of really apathetic about voting is because it's not taught to them as a habit, and really habits start within the family at the dinner table. And even with the bill, there was like a lot of controversy about whether or not there were going to be disagreements harbored between family members over the way that they were voting for a school board member. And I'll go back to what one of the lawmakers on the committee hearing said. She said, there's no better place to disagree about who you're voting for than at the dinner table with the people you love, where you come back home after school and you're watching TV with the people who voted differently than you. I really think that is such an insightful way to look at it. A lot of times, students and parents kind of feel a little bit of tension within interfamily disagreements. But really, I think that it's a point of beauty. I don't agree with my parents on everything that they think. My parents don't always agree with me. I don't even agree with my own sister half the time. But we're still family, and it's really just so exciting to be able to hear these different perspectives. But one thing that we do agree on is voting and enacting that as a civic duty and responsibility. Voting really starts in the household. It is a terrible time to create a habit when you're 18, starting maybe a job or moving out of your parents' house, going to college or pursuing something else. That is a very bad time to try and create a new habit. If you ever tried to get a college student to clean their dorm room at 18. You know how hard it is. It just doesn't happen. And so building those habits when you're 16 and 17, and starting at the dinner table with your parents, and also just having students involved also has the ripple effect of getting their parents involved. If you're teaching students about the importance of voting when they're in high school, guess who they're taking that information back to? Their parents. When their parents get the ballot in the mail, the students are going to be bringing in their ballots at the kitchen table and helping them fill it out. I know that's what I did when my parents gained their right to vote just a couple of years ago. I found the yellow envelope in the mailbox and I brought it right in and I was like, you have to fill this out today. And, you know, those kinds of things, I think it really is a symbiotic relationship, which can benefit both the parent and the student, but as a whole, the state and the government, as we move forward in helping create and cultivate a representative democracy, not only now, but for generations to come.
I'll try to add 30 seconds to that, Janet.
Please.
Not everybody has a family like Dhati's where, you know, most often kids come home from school, a parent asks, what did you do today? And they get they might get a couple of words beyond the shoulder shrug.
No.
So there are some great models out there of conversation starters and things that families can do to cultivate these conversations. And we have some teachers using some great examples of that. There are also some community partners working on family civic scavenger hunts within their own community to see how civic life is everywhere and being able to identify that. And then I already mentioned service, academic service can connect kids and families with their community. So there's some real tangible things that can be done for those of us like Dhati and I who had parents. My parents were lifelong voters, and I don't think I've ever missed an opportunity to vote, including primaries, because of what was modeled for me. So that seamlessness of families getting engaged with their children and all the things that we've just mentioned really is key.
Would you mind taking the last word, Superintendent Dickson? I'd love for you to think, I know you're so much more responsible in so many elements of the comprehensive K through 12 education system and beyond, with some early learning opportunities as well, and the post-secondary gaps. The question from the audience that was on how can civic initiatives better prepare students for completing education, finding that full-time work, having a healthy family in adulthood, or just in general, this upward mobility. What are the connecting tissues, you think, in ensuring that civics is part of that equation?
I think civics education is a connective tissue. You know, it really broadens the perspectives of our citizenry. It helps prepare us for a world where everyone contributes and we're all valued. It helps students understand and appreciate the government that resides in their community and their, whether it's from a school board, a community, a state, and a nation, and enables our students to think about how not only were they given opportunities, but how can they give back and continue to create opportunities. I so appreciate what both William and Dhati have said today about active participation, and that participating helps you own it. So if we are to continue to appreciate and grow and be responsible citizens for this democracy, then we have to be willing to participate in it and understand that. So I do believe that civic education really is the connective tissue. It shouldn't be an afterthought, but it really can be the hub of the wheel that connects all of these other content areas together in many ways.
Well, thank you so much, Dhati, Mr. Shields, Superintendent Dickson. I think we can all see why we were so excited to feature the state of Utah, and I think we'll be excited to actually host your governor at our Reagan Institute Summit on Education on July 27th and 28th. And thank you for not just what you've spoken about today, but for all you do and will continue to do in service of our country.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.
Thank you.